The sky began to bleed in the spring of 1815, a phenomenon witnessed not by physicians but by farmers and fishermen across the Indonesian archipelago. On the remote island of Sumbawa, Mount Tambora, a volcano they had long considered dormant, stirred with a deep subterranean groan. For 3 years it had whispered its warnings in tremors and small eruptions, but on the evening of April 10 it finally screamed. The eruption was not a single event, but a cataclysmic symphony, a column of fire and molten rock that punched over 25 miles into the stratosphere, followed by a collapse so violent it created a caldera nearly 4 miles wide. The sound of the blast itself was heard over 1,200 miles away, mistaken for cannon fire by British ships. For days, a shroud of ash turned noon into midnight across hundreds of miles. But the true terror of Tambora was just beginning its journey. It had not merely exploded rock and ash, it had launched an army of invisible gaseous assassins, millions of tons of sulfur dioxide into the high, cold reaches of the atmosphere. There they transformed into a gleaming veil of sulfuric acid aerosols, a particulate shield that would, with patient and global cruelty, begin to drift on the jet streams, encircling the planet with a single, chilling purpose: to steal the sun. The first signs in the Northern Hemisphere were deceptive, even beautiful. In 1816, the sunsets became lurid masterpieces of purple, orange, and crimson, painted by the high-altitude veil scattering the sun's dying light. Artists like J.M.W. Turner captured these fiery skies, unaware they were painting a symptom of planetary illness. But by late spring, the ominous truth became impossible to ignore. Where May should have brought tender warmth and greening fields, it brought instead a persistent iron chill. Frosts blackened new shoots from New England to the Swiss Alps. Farmers, their faces etched with deepening worry, replanted their seeds, trusting in the ancient rhythms of the seasons. But June arrived not with summer's promise, but with winter's revenge. Snowfalls blanketed the northeastern United States and Canada. In Quebec, 1.5 feet of snow fell in early June. Ice skaters glided on frozen lakes in Pennsylvania in July. Across Western Europe, unceasing cold rains drowned crops in the field, the gray clouds a perpetual lid on the sky. The sun, when it appeared at all, was a pallid, ghostly disk, its heat unable to penetrate the volcanic haze. This was not a storm or a cold snap, it was the systematic failure of summer itself. The consequences unfolded with a grim, predictable logic. First, the green things died. Grain stalks remained stunted and pale, corn kernels failed to form, and potato vines withered. Then, the hunger came. By the autumn of 1816, the price of oats in Europe had quadrupled. A bushel of corn in the United States cost more than a week's wages for a laborer. In village squares and city markets, the desperation turned visceral. In Switzerland, mobs stormed bakeries and grain warehouses. In Ireland, already impoverished, famine fever, typhus, stalked the weakened population. One Bernese pastor wrote a diary entry that could stand for millions. The trees are bare, the fields are yellow, and the people's faces are white. The social fabric, strained by the aftermath of the Napoleonic Wars, began to tear. Governments were powerless against the sky. In a world where over 90% of the population depended directly on agriculture, the failure of the harvest was not an economic setback, it was an existential threat. People ate what they could: nettles, rotten turnips, and in the most horrific tales from Europe, family pets and worse. The weather had become the single most important actor in human history, a silent, chilling tyrant. Yet within this global catastrophe, pockets of human resilience and strange innovation flickered. The most famous, perhaps, was born in a villa on the shores of Lake Geneva. A small group of literary friends, including the poet Lord Byron, the philosopher Percy Bysshe Shelley, and his future wife, Mary Godwin, were trapped indoors by the incessant rainfall of that wet, ungenial summer. With the gloomy, spectacular sunsets as their backdrop, Byron proposed a contest to see who could write the most terrifying ghost story. Stirred by philosophical discussions about the nature of life and the limits of science, and perhaps by the very atmosphere of a world seemingly undone, 18-year-old Mary conceived a waking nightmare, the story of a scientist who animates dead flesh. Her novel, Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, is forever haunted by the sublime and awful weather of its birth, its Arctic frames and electrical storms, a direct reflection of 1816's climatic fury. Meanwhile, in Germany, the relentless bad weather ruined a walking tour for another inventor, Karl Drais. Facing a failure of the oat crop that was starving the horses, he sought a human-powered alternative to animal transportation. His solution was the Lauf machine, or running machine, a wooden precursor to the bicycle. The year without a summer, in its strangeness, was midwife to both a foundational myth of the technological age and a step toward personal mobility. The ripples spread further still, shaping demographics and nations. The crop failures in the Rhine Valley in Switzerland pushed already struggling families to the brink. Pamphlets promoting the fertile soils and, crucially, the stable climate of the American Midwest found a desperate audience. This period ignited the first major wave of German immigration to the United States, a human tide that would profoundly reshape the cultural landscape of states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. In New England, the last great subsistence crisis convinced countless farmers that the rocky soil and fickle climate of the region could no longer support them. They abandoned their farms in droves, heading west to the promise of the frontier or into the burgeoning industrial mills of cities like Lowell, accelerating America's shift from an agrarian to an industrial society. The volcano on a distant island, in essence, helped replot the map of human settlement across the Atlantic. By 1817, the volcanic veil in the stratosphere finally thinned and settled. The sun regained its strength, and seasons slowly returned to their familiar cadence. That the world was scarred and changed. Historians estimate that the direct and indirect effects of the climate shock, famine, disease, displacement, may have claimed over 200,000 lives in Europe alone. It left behind a profound psychological imprint, a generation for whom the very order of nature had proven terrifyingly fragile. It also spurred scientific inquiry. Before Tambora, weather was local, and climate was simply the sum of weathers. But no local theory could explain a global, simultaneous catastrophe. The painstaking work of connecting the dots began, led by figures like American scholar William Humphreys, who would later link the cold years to atmospheric dimming. The event stands as the first truly global climate crisis of the modern age, a stark demonstration of how intimately and violently the planetary system is connected. Today, standing before the serene caldera of Mount Tambora, now filled with a tranquil lake, it is difficult to conjure the global havoc it unleashed. Yet its legacy is a chilling parable for our time. Tambora was a natural event, a geological accident. Its power lay in its ability to alter the atmosphere's chemistry and physics, triggering cascading failures in food systems, economies, and societies. We now live in an era where human activity is performing a similar, though far more deliberate, alteration of the atmosphere. The lesson of 1816 is not that we should fear volcanoes, but that we must respect with the deepest humility the delicate balance of the climate system. It is a system that, when pushed beyond a threshold, does not respond with gentle adjustments, but with a violent, encompassing recalibration. The year without a summer whispers from the past, a clear, urgent warning. A world without a predictable climate is a world without peace, without bread, and without security. It is a world where the sky itself can become an enemy.